I know that we have some visitors here that have joined us. We're now going to have walking meditation. At the sound of the clappers, the first and third rows will turn to their right, and the second and back rows will turn to their left. Those of you who know the pattern can help those who are visitors this evening. We'll now recite the Song of Covenant, which is found on page 8 of your stapled liturgy books. The liturgy books can be found under your large cushion. Page 8, the Song of Covenant. We, the Daishin Kokoji Sangha, with respect for the worth and dignity of each person, with wonder at the wisdom and compassion we seek to cultivate by practice, and with deep gratitude for the teachers of this lineage and our connection to one another, covenant to support each other by upholding the precepts of doing no harm, practicing good, and actualizing good for others. Please be seated for this evening's Dharma talk. Sit comfortably and face towards our teacher. In a moment, we will recite, also on page 8, the Gatha on opening the sutra. Gatha on opening the sutra. The Dharma incomparably profound and infinitely subtle is rarely encountered even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning.
Well, this is interesting. The lectern didn't make it up here.
That's because
You're fired.
Thank you.
I know, that would be too easy. Just roll it on up here. Yeah. It's fine, just... You're good at jogging, I know that. 10,001, Shanya. Thank you both. Now, what was I going to talk about? Well, thank you all for coming out on such a wintry, wet, dreary evening. But, I understand why we do it, because Wednesday evening practice is just so delicious. The Zendo is still, and it's calm, and it's deep. Of course, what's going on the individual cushions might not be still and calm because we're all working with our own karma, right? That's what we're doing. And I really want to speak to that a little bit tonight about how we work with our minds. Because the Bodhisattva path, where this longing to come to our true natures and to bring all beings with us, does mean that we have to be attentive to our minds, to our crazy neuroses, our habitual patterns. Because if we're not, we're always going to be led around by those. They're always going to control us. And because, of course, we just have this life. This is it. This is what we have to work with. There's nothing better coming. This is it. Just to be really Zen depressing. And this work we do on the cushion is the basis for our lives. It's the basis for maintaining the precepts. It's the basis for integrating the paramitas, the virtues, and it's the basis of connecting to the Bodhisattva vow. So it's really important that we get to know our minds really well and get to make friends with our minds. And just to say up front, the Bodhisattva path isn't about becoming a good person. It's about opening, growing, the ability to meet each moment as it is without a set of rules, without a set of responses, just fully engaging the moment. And to do that, we actually need to be present. A while back, we talked about the kleshas, the strong emotions that arise from greed, anger, and ignorance, jealousy, pride, anger, those emotions which are hot. And if we don't take that sacred pause to actually see this energy arising in the mind, we will be hooked. And we will feed that feeling, that emotion with thought, and we are off and running. And mindfulness is out the window. But tonight, I think I want to talk about another aspect of what goes on in our minds, and that's the hindrances. So the hindrances that obscure our clarity of mind. And the way I've always learned about the hindrances is in relation to meditation, and there's a ton of texts in the Theravadan tradition on this. But actually, what happens on the cushion is not separate than what happens in our lives, right? We meet exactly the same stuff off the cushion. So I always feel examining the hindrances is very much examining our own lives, too. And it certainly can bring clarity to our meditation also. So the 5 hindrances, our old friend clinging, ill will or aversion, sloth or sleepiness, restlessness, and doubt. And their arising is not a problem. You're human, they are going to arise. That's just the way our minds are. They've helped us survive evolutionary. They've so prevalent in our society. There's no way that we couldn't encounter these in our minds. And of course, the mind is naturally radiant, bright, luminous, and yes, clouds pass by. Clouds pass by. The question is, how do we relate to those clouds? Well, we don't do battle with the clouds, because if you battle with the clouds, you will be battling with the clouds for the rest of your life, because this doesn't get any better, right? Those clouds are always going to be floating by. How do you work with them skillfully? So we learn the technique in meditation, of course. We keep our seat. We see that these clouds are impermanent, they're insubstantial, they're empty. We notice them, we acknowledge them, we let them go. So Shantideva actually says, all infinite sufferings arise from the mind. And they really arise from how we relate to these problems. Circumstances are never the real problem. We've seen people practice in the most terrible circumstances, concentration camps, in the midst of war, in the midst of great loss. It's not the circumstance that's ever the problem. It's how we relate to it. And in order to explore that, we really need to get to know our own minds. So when we first sit down in meditation, we can check where we are. What is arising? What is going on? Are we grasping? Are we pushing away? Are we sleepy? Are we restless? Are we doubting this whole process? Why am I sitting here on this cushion on a Wednesday night? And we simply encounter them without condemning them, judging them, and without submitting to them. So how do we actually do that? And if we can actually do that, we can then make the adjustments in our practice to actually work with them. And of course, we can make the adjustments in our lives when these factors come up. So just briefly to talk about the hindrances, the first one, of course, is desire. All of the wants of the body, food, sex, all the stuff, experiences, and clinging to these, no matter how noble that desire is. Maybe it's the desire to come to complete and full awakening. Well, if you cling to that, you are never going to come to complete and full awakening. It isn't the object that's the problem, it's the attachment in the mind. So the Buddha, of course, had lots of metaphors for the hindrances. And the baseline is the clear mind is the pond that is completely still. And the practitioner can look in the pond and see their reflection perfectly. For clinging, the metaphor he gives is this pond a dye has been thrown into this pond and suffusing the water. And I think it's important to realize there's really nothing wrong with desire in itself. I mean, we enjoy our lives, right? And we should enjoy it. But they do feed into if only thinking. You know, if only things weren't this way, if only things were a little better, if only I were, you know, thinner, more attractive, more knowledgeable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If only all of my ducks were in a row, I could be a great practitioner, I could come to Shishin, et cetera. But of course, your ducks are never, ever going to be in a row, maybe for a split second, and then they're going to wander off again. So, and have you noticed, I find the hindrances really come up at Shishin in a very tangible, noticeable way. Last Shishin, I remember on a Wednesday afternoon, before it started, I was having a conversation with my husband saying, you know, if we only had one more room in this house, life would be so much better and everything would flow better and I could get my work done more effectively. And so then I go to Shishin Friday, and Friday afternoon, my main issue is if only they had something sweet after dinner. That would be so great. So clearly, it's not the object of desire, however rare and valuable it may be. It's actually the attachment we have in our mind to it. And of course, clinging is always around lack. This moment is not enough. I am not enough. That's always the basis of clinging. And then ill will, all of the rejecting states of mind, anger, judgment, being controlling, all of those tight, aversive states of mind. The Buddha likens this to water that's boiling and frothing and bubbling. And of course, there's a myriad then of children of these of these aversive states, impatience, frustration. We're all very familiar with these. And they're caused by, of course, dislike of some aspect of our experience. And they always involve separating from the present moment in a very forceful way. And of course, what are we doing in our practice? We're actually dissolving all of the barriers. With the aversive state of mind, we're actually reinforcing the barriers. So it's really useful to notice. Again, at Shishin, I know I can become extremely annoyed at stupid little things that happen at Shishin. Like the window is open 1/4 of an inch, and I'm over here, and it's like, damn it, who would do such a thing? I remember Joseph Goldstein, who is a really, he's a big name in Vipassana. He talked about going to a meditation retreat and being annoyed at everyone's socks during walking meditation. And actually, I thought, I actually have been annoyed at people's socks. You know, somebody's wearing purple. I think maybe it was Shugen was wearing very colorful socks once. And I was like, what the hell? Again, it's not the actual thing that's arising, it's our relationship to it. So, sloth or drowsiness. And clearly, sometimes you're sleepy and you just need to go take a nap, right? But if sloth or drowsiness is a habitual pattern in your meditation, in your daily life, you really need to look at it more deeply. And the Buddha uses the analogy of a pond that's overgrown with moss and algae. And meditation, we call this sinking mind. So the mind is actually very still. I mean, the mind is really calm, but the energy is really low. So the instruction in meditation is try and keep the calmness of mind and up the energy. But a lot can underlie sleepiness. Dumbness, did I say dumbness? I meant to say numbness. Numbness. Disassociation. Times when we actually don't want to encounter our experience and we disassociate from it. And you know, I always kind of qualify this. Pema Chodron, who is just one of the greatest teachers on compassion, she always says that you don't have to be a bodhisattva all of the time. Well, you're a bodhisattva all of the time, but your level of bodhisattvaing can vary. She said, sometimes you throw the door open and you go out there into the world and you are on fire and you're just doing great. And other days you just open the door and it's like, oh, you just got to close it again. You just look out and that's enough for today. So I always kind of qualify the disassociating part associated with sleepiness, because sometimes that actually maybe is what you need. But again, if it's a habitual pattern, you really need to look at what's under it. And the way you do that, of course, is come into your body. Come into your body and see what that experience actually is. Another thing that you should look at with regard to sleepiness is boredom. I mean, boredom is, in our society, is like the most awful thing that could happen to you, that you wouldn't actually be occupied. And boredom can also be lack of attention. In meditation instruction, we talk about aim. So we're not focusing on every breath for the rest of our lives. We're focusing on this particular breath right now. So the aim is really specific. I know during COVID, Rinson used to say that because a lot of people had a lot of anxiety and were having difficulty sitting. And he said, if you can just connect with one breath, that is practice. And then the energetic opposite of sleepiness is restlessness. And that covers many feelings that are really like a pandemic in society today, worry, fear, anxiety. Thomas Merton, the Catholic teacher, he used to say that anxiety is spiritual insecurity. You know, the first time I heard that, I had a really aversive reaction, which is like a red flag right there. I thought, he's pretty privileged. He doesn't have to worry about kids and a mortgage and, housing and all this stuff. But honestly, the more I encountered anxiety in my body, the more I realized that is true. It is the feeling that this moment isn't enough, that I'm not enough. That really is the basis of anxiety. And the Buddha used the analogy for restlessness of a pool stirred by wind into ripples and waves. So, as I said, it's the energetic opposite of sleepiness. So we have a lot of energy, but the mind is really agitated. And it can be agitated. We can have physical agitation, during Dharma school, Kyon has a wiggle spot. So when the kids do their 1 minute of zazen, if it's just too much, they can go wiggle in the wiggle spot. And I don't think we will ever have a wiggle spot in the Zendo, much as some of us would like it to be there. But of course, it can also be emotional. It can also be psychological. And typically in the teachings, restlessness is associated with regret. They're energetically very similar. And it's not regret that's constructive, like I'm learning from my mistakes. It's that recursive regret, going over and over things that we think we did wrong in the past. It's imbued with guilt, more often with shame. And also, of course, so it can be looking into the past. It can also be looking into the future. One I know really well, what if? The what if mindset. What if we can't make the budget this year? What if we can't pay the electric bill? And on and on and on. And of course, there's ego. Sensei always says that when you practice and you really are starting to calm the mind and go deep, the ego will do anything it can to reify itself. And of course, what we're doing in sitting is we're just being, we're not doing. So the ego will very much encourage you to want to do. It's like, I could just shave 5 minutes off this morning, sit and go do. I could do something really useful. We all know that feeling, right? So we don't judge or condemn ourselves. We simply notice what is arising, simply notice it. And there are a lot of strategies for dealing with restlessness, basically around lowering the energy, not pushing the energy down. There's nothing aggressive about it. It's simply opening and grounding the energy. One way we do it is kinnin, or you can do it as kinnin, walking. You just let this energy, instead of having it frozen in your body, put it into movement. And there's so much wisdom in walking. I have a neighbor who had half of her lung removed less than a week ago, and she's out walking. So I go walk with her, so I don't find her body in the street. And we walk really slowly, and we just walk around the block, a fraction of a mile. But when I come back to my house, I am grounded. It's really amazing, the wisdom that's in our body, if we just trust it. We also can make the space big. They say if you have a wild animal, you tether it to a pole and it'll just go crazy and injure itself. But if you give it a big enough space, it will actually still. And how you deal with restlessness can be very personal. Working with sound is one way of doing it. I know in one of the Tibetan traditions, in Mahamudra, one of the instructions is to listen for the sound of the ships in the harbor. Well, as you know, Tibet is a landlocked country. So you're really listening for the sound of those ships in the harbor. It's vast, big. If you're doing metta, you can do metta for the entire cosmos, out beyond the furthest stars. Big, big, big. Go outside and look at the moon, look at the stars. So we ground, we soften, open. We don't fight it. The worst thing you can do with restlessness is to try and freeze it. And again, we're not worrying about psychological patterns forever. We're not solving this problem forever, just right now, in this moment. We're just working with this energy. And then doubt. So doubt is the mind crowded with questions and uncertainty. Why am I sitting here on a Wednesday night? Why isn't my practice progressing? The Buddha described the doubt-filled mind as a pool of water that's murky, cloudy, shadowed. And doubt, the underlying aspects of doubt is a lack of trust in ourselves, that we're incapable, that we're powerless, and that we want certainty in the face of uncertainty, of an uncertain world. So fundamentalism. We can really see how this is operating in our world today, where people are clinging to a past that never existed and want to freeze it there. And doubt usually gets tagged onto the end of the hindrances, but I think it's really important. In the story of the Buddha's enlightenment, when Mara comes to distract him from actually attaining enlightenment, first he kind of tempts him with clinging with, his beautiful daughters. Then he tempts him with aversion, with the army. And then he brings out the big guns and he says, "Who do you think you are?" Doubt, right there. Lack of trust in yourself. And the Buddha simply touches the earth, embodied experience, which is what we're doing on the cushion, embodied experience. Trust this body, always trust this body. So in the meditative journey, we train in how to deal with these circumstances. And really, the hindrances are our classroom. They're our curriculum. This is what we get to work with. It's no failing on our part. It's actually, this is the work. If we never had to do any of this kind of work, well, we wouldn't really need practice. We'd all be enlightened, right? But this is the human mind. And we learn in the practice to sustain attention and intention. And attention and intention rise and fall together. This is why mindfulness is the ground of our practice. I know it's like all over pop culture these days, but someone said you can have, I've forgotten, which way does it go? You can have mindfulness without Buddhism, but you cannot have Buddhism without mindfulness. If you are not mindful, it's going to be extremely difficult to follow this path. If you don't actually know what's arising in your mind, how can you actually work with it? And also at the basis of this practice is emotional literacy. You have to know clinging as clinging. You have to know aversion as aversion, sloth as sloth, restlessness as restlessness, doubt as doubt. If you don't actually know what's arising in your mind, it's going to be really hard to work with it skillfully. So, as I said before, the mind is naturally radiant, luminous, vast sky. Clouds float by. That's just the way it is. How do we relate to them? And that's really our practice. That's what we do. Mary Oliver. I go down to the shore in the morning, and depending on the hour, the waves are rolling in or moving out. And I say, "Oh, I am miserable. What should I do?" And the sea says in its lovely voice, "Excuse me, I have work to do." So we all have work to do, without judgment, without condemnation, without submitting to the hindrances or the kleshas. Just simply being present in this moment and giving ourselves enough space to work with it. So let's work with it in the great heart of love and compassion. Maybe so.
We'll now recite the Bodhisattva vows found on page 8. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our service for this evening. Are there any announcements to be made? There are always many things happening within the temple. I encourage you to check out the temple homepage or Facebook, and you'll see lots of stuff going on. Unless there's other burning announcements, we'll call it a night, and please restore the Zendo. Thank you for your practice.